Welcome back to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. Well, it's been over 2 weeks since my last video, and part of the reason for that is because I've been working out problems in my own home lab, and yes, believe it or not, that does occur. The other part of it is I was doing a lot of research for upcoming videos, and I want to make sure that everything works the first time. So anyway, today we're going to talk about migrating a Virtualbox Virtual Machine to an Incus Virtual Machine. And we're going to migrate a snapshot, not just a virtual machine, but a snapshot from a Virtualbox Virtual Machine to an Incus Virtual Machine. And that's probably one of the more complex use cases. And so Incus Virtual Machines use the same types of disk images as the Linux QEMU hypervisor, and so often we can use QEMU-IMG to convert the images. However, Virtualbox snapshots are differential backups, and they do not contain all of the original information for the base virtual machine to allow QEMU-IMG to convert the disk drive. So that being the case, we're going to use the vbox image command, which is a command line command that Virtualbox has, to create a QCOW2 image of the Virtualbox disk that will retain the original UUID of the Virtualbox disk, along with all of the necessary information to boot the virtual machine once it moves over to Incus. And the Incus Migrate tool, as of version 6.6, is able to import both QCOW2 images and VMDK virtual machine disk files into an Incus virtual machine instance. And prior to that, Incus-Migrate could only move raw images. So let's go see how to migrate a Virtualbox virtual machine to an Incus virtual machine. Here we are in the Virtualbox Machine Manager, and I've got this machine highlighted that's named Ubuntu, and it's a Windows 10 desktop looking version of Ubuntu, and I'll explain in a second. But basically, I've had all of these various snapshots, and down here at the bottom, I have this snapshot called the Windows 10 Desktop. So I'll go ahead and start this up just so you can see what this looks like. It goes ahead and boots in Virtualbox, and once it boots up, I'll get a login prompt, and I'll type in my password, and we'll end up being logged into this Windows 10 looking version of Ubuntu 2404 that I crafted. So here we are at my Ubuntu 2404 desktop, looking a whole lot like Windows. And this is just a little fun project that I put together here, but as an example, we can go ahead and bring up the file manager. And the file manager here looks, again, very Windows, but if we go down here and do a help about, what we have here is a Nemo file manager, and it's just skinned a bit differently. And then if we go down here and we click on the start menu and type CMD, it will go ahead and of course bring up a terminal. So one of the first things that we want to look at before we can transition this VM from Virtualbox over to an Incus VM is we want to go ahead and look at our display type. And we do that with an echo of XDG underbar session underbar type. And here you can see that we're running X11 as our window manager. We also want to determine what type of desktop manager we're running, and we can do an echo on $GDM session. And here you see we are running the Cinnamon desktop manager. And that's one way that we're able to change all of these particular GUI elements. Cinnamon is the desktop manager that runs in Linux Mint, but you can run it really on any Linux. When you're running any virtual machine inside of VirtualBox, you're also running the VirtualBox guest editions. And we want to go ahead and deinstall those or uninstall those before we move on to transitioning the VM. So we're going to do a sudo /opt/virtual or VBox guest editions uninstall.sh. And we go ahead and provide our sudo password, and it will go ahead and remove any installed version of the VirtualBox guest editions. In order to be able to connect to our Ubuntu after we move the instance over to Incus, we're going to have to install the Incus agent. So I'm going to do a sudo apt install incus-agent, and incus-agent is the piece of software that allows you to do an Incus shell and also an Incus console. Now that we've uninstalled the guest editions and installed the Incus agent, we're going to go ahead and shut down the VirtualBox Virtual Machine, and so we'll go ahead and do that. As mentioned earlier, I have an entire series of snapshots that I've done on this VirtualBox Virtual Machine, and the snapshot that I'm interested in getting is the current state or the last snapshot that I've taken. So we want to come over here and right-click on the virtual machine and say Show in File Manager. The File Manager folder that we're in is Home, Scott, VirtualBox VMs, Linux, because I created a Linux group for my Linux VMs, and then Ubuntu is the name of this particular VM guest machine. Now you might be inclined to think that Ubuntu.vdi is the disk image that we want, but that's not true. Instead, we have to head into the snapshots folder, and in the snapshots folder we have a whole series of VDI files, and the latest VDI file will be the one that has the latest date here, and this is the file name that we're going to be interested in. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and exit this folder, and I'll go ahead and also exit VirtualBox, and here we are on a terminal on my desktop machine. Let's go ahead and CD over to my desktop/working folder, which is where I plan to do all of this conversion. And over here, let's go ahead and we would think that we would execute the command qemu-img convert, which would convert the VirtualBox image over to a form that we can use with the Incus Virtual Machine. Unfortunately, we're dealing with a VirtualBox differential image, and that is what the snapshot is. It is actually a form of differential backup, and there's a lot of internal moving parts that prevent this from experiencing a direct conversion of our file. So therefore, in order to be able to do a proper conversion of that snapshot, we're going to have to use the VBox manage clone medium of type disk, and we're pointing to /home/Scott/VirtualBox VMs, Linux, and then Linux is the name of a group I created for my Linux virtual machines over in VirtualBox, and the name of my machine is Ubuntu, and then I'm pointing into the snapshots directory that we just saw, and I'm including the really long name of that VDI file. And that entire file spec is quoted because it has an embedded space, and then I'm going ahead and pointing it to /home/Scott/desktop/working, and I'm giving the name of the converted disk image converted.qcow, which is actually creating a qcow2 image. and then I'm specifying the format to be QCOW. In order to take our new converted.qcow disk image and import it into an Incus Virtual Machine, we're going to need a program called Incus-migrate. And so normally you would do a sudo Incus-migrate. Unfortunately, by default, Incus-migrate is not installed as a part of Incus. And so consequently, we need to be able to install Incus-extra with the sudo apt install Incus-extra, which will give us the Incus-migrate command. Now that Incus-extra is installed and we have the Incus-migrate command, we're ready to do the conversion with the sudo Incus-migrate. And it asked us whether or not the local Incus server is the target, and in my case the answer is yes, because my Incus server is running on this machine. Would you like to convert or create a container or virtual machine? For the purposes of this exercise, we're creating a virtual machine. And then what is the name of the new instance? I'm going to go ahead and call it converted. And then it says, please provide a path to a disk partition or QCOW raw VMDK image. And in our case, it's going to be converted.qcow, because that's the name of the file that we converted with VBox Manage. Now, as of Incus version 6.6, we can now convert QCOW2 and VMDK images. Prior to that, before 6.6, we could only import raw images. And it says, does the VM support UEFI booting? In this particular case, it does. And does it support secure boot? And in my particular case, the answer to that question is no. And so it says, what is your instance to be created? And it gives you the summary of everything that we selected above. And here we have additional options that we can also enter. One of them is that we can send our instance to another storage pool where perhaps we have more space. And so I'm going to go ahead and just say import this over here, choosing a 1, which will go into my default storage pool, and it begins to convert the disk image called converted.qcow, and it's going to import that and create an Incus virtual machine named converted. Now this is going to take quite some time. Depending on the size of your disk image, it could take hours if you're converting something that might be 40 or 50 gigabytes. And be mindful that you need enough storage in your storage pool to be able to accommodate the size of a potentially large virtual disk image, because the container will require that in your storage pool that you're importing it into. Now that our virtual machine has been imported into Incus, we can at this point do an Incus start on converted. And if we immediately do an Incus shell on converted, it will tell us that the VM agent isn't currently running. But as you will recall, I did install the Incus agent before I did the conversion, and it's just a matter of letting it start up. And so now after a minute or so, I can do an Incus shell converted, and we get to the prompt. What I want to do here first is I want to do an apt install on btop. And now that btop is installed, the next thing I want to do is a btop command. And you'll notice here that our converted VM only has right at 1 gig of memory, and it also has only one CPU core. So I'm going to go ahead and quit out of BTOP and exit out of the virtual machine and do an Incus stop on converted. Ubuntu 2404 requires a minimum of 4 gigabytes of memory and 2 CPU cores, and we can achieve that with an Incus config set converted, which is the name of our Incus virtual machine, limits.memory equal 4 gigabyte, and limits.cpu equals 2. At this point, we'll try to start our Incus VM and enter the GUI with an Incus start converted -- console equals VGA, and this will go ahead and bring up the remote viewer. I'll go ahead and make this full screen, and there we see the Zably splash screen for the Incus virtual machine, and as it boots up we should have our login prompt. So now I go ahead and type in my password, I hit enter, and almost immediately it will pause, and then it will end up going into the GUI and then exiting back out to the login prompt once again. So you notice here that it did not correctly log in. If you will recall, back in VirtualBox, we used to have the X11 display manager, and I've discovered that an Incus virtual machine prefers the Wayland display manager. And so we want to go ahead and click to log in, but then go down here to the right corner and click on the gear, and then we want to go ahead and say Cinnamon on Wayland experimental, and then I'll go ahead and type in my password. At this point, it will correctly log in to the desktop. In order to make that change permanent, we're going to go ahead and pop up a terminal. Since we're using the GDM3 as opposed to the LightDM login manager, we're going to go ahead and edit the file /etc gdm3 /custom.conf. And when we edit this file, we want to go ahead and scroll down to the section where it has Wayland enable, and we're going to go ahead and uncomment that and change that from Wayland enable false to Wayland enable true. I'll go ahead and do a Control-O and enter to write the file out, and a Control-X to exit the nano editor. At this point, I'll go ahead and do a sudo reboot now, and that will go ahead and reboot our virtual machine. And that will go ahead and exit our interface so we can do an Incus console converted -- type equals VGA, and that will go ahead and enter back into the console, and I can go ahead and make it full screen. At this point, I'll go ahead and type in my password, and this time it will log in to the desktop correctly. At this point, if I pop up a terminal and I do an echo xdg _session _type, you can see that we're running Wayland. And then likewise, if we look at the session, we'll see that our session, of course, is still running Cinnamon, but Cinnamon on Wayland. And one other thing we want to do here is run BTOP, and from BTOP you can see that we now have 4 gigs of memory and 2 CPU cores. So in summary, the Incus version 6.6 Incus-Migrate tool allows both QCOW2 and VMDK virtual machine disk images to be imported into an Incus virtual machine. And VBox image is required to retain all of the information if what you are importing is a virtual machine snapshot from VirtualBox. So my personal experience has been that some desktop managers, notably Cinnamon in my example of the Windows 10 looking Ubuntu desktop, require the Wayland window manager in an Incus VM in order to be able to log in properly. And Incus Migrate can also import a raw disk image to create an Incus Virtual Machine. And it's possible to perform a physical to virtual, otherwise known as P2V migration of a bare metal machine to an Incus VM, and I've tried that, and that really has worked remarkably well. Anyway, that's it for today. Please subscribe and like to the channel, and don't forget to hit that notification bell, and we'll see you next time.